Ladies and gentlemen, good morning and welcome to the Royal Canadian Dragoons 120th anniversary of Leliefontein. We appreciate you joining us today from across the country as we mark this significant moment in our regimental history. The guidon is a visible symbol of pride, honor, and devotion of dragoons to the regiment and Canada. In cavalry regiments, the guidon is carried by the senior master warrant officer and escorted by the two senior warrant officers with a sergeant as guidon orderly. The only personnel allowed to handle the guidon are the guidon bearer, commanding officers of the regiment, colonels and former colonels of the regiment, and the regimental sergeant major. The current guidon was consecrated and presented to the regiment in 1998. The guidon party this year is composed of the Regimental Technical Quartermaster Sergeant, Master Warrant Officer Christopher LeBlanc, the Regimental Operations Warrant Officer Dustin Barnett, and the Headquarters Squadron Quartermaster, Sergeant Warrant Officer Jason McDonald. The guidon orderly is the Regimental Training Sergeant, Sergeant Travis Hackworth.
Salute! Attention!
Please take your seats. As we pay our respects to the action at Leliefontein, you will notice that the original Victoria Crosses won by Lieutenant Turner and Sergeant Holland at Leliefontein are on display in front of the dais. Lieutenant Cockburn's Victoria Cross is held at the War Museum in Ottawa. Accompanying these Victoria Crosses is one of the two 12-pounder field guns of D Battery used as part of the rear guard at Leliefontein. The reviewing officer for today's ceremony is the Colonel of the Regiment, Brigadier General Peter Atkinson. Brigadier General Atkinson enrolled in the Canadian Armed Forces as an armor officer in 1977. He has commanded at the troop and squadron level and was the 47th commanding officer of the regiment from 1998 to 2000. He has served with the Royal Canadian Dragoons in 4 Brigade in Lahr and 2 Brigade in Petawawa. He also commanded Canadian Forces Base Kingston, 2 Area Support Group in Toronto, and a task force in Bosnia with the NATO Stabilization Force. Promoted to Brigadier General in 2007, he was then appointed the Director General Operations on the Strategic Joint Staff at National Defense Headquarters. From July 2008 to August 2011, he served as the 3 Corps Deputy Commanding General in Fort Hood, Texas. He retired in June 2012, and he was appointed as the Colonel of the Regiment in April 2018. The commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel Kirchhoff, will now address the ceremony.
"120 years ago, in a small farm town in South Africa, the Royal Canadian Dragoons distinguished themselves in an action that we continue to recognize today. This year's ceremonies are unlike any other. We're unable to bring our friends and family together, but this has become a constant refrain over the last 9 months. So as we've done in years past, we carry on. We have the symbols of our regimental history and the action of Leliefontein here with us in the form of the gun, the Victoria Crosses, and the guidon. So although the ceremony is not the same, it ought to be familiar. And recognizing soldiers for their work runs so much deeper than the Victoria Crosses we see on parade today. Every certificate, commander's coin, commendation, or award is a tangible reminder of the hard work that they've put in. But more than that, there's no limitation on saying thank you after a hard day's work. Hard work is the key, and we ask a lot of all our dragoons. This year has been difficult in a very different way. We've had Dragoons deployed both domestically and overseas. Dragoons are currently deployed on all of Canada's major international operations and many of the smaller ones. Dragoons continue to represent all of us wearing a Springbok and the black beret, or a maroon one, or a tan one, or a blue one, proudly. And while traveling has been limited, the RSM and I sadly have not been able to get down to see C Squadron in Gagetown in person. It's immensely rewarding to see the smiles on the faces of Dragoons as we return to work, even if those smiles are hidden behind masks. Every day we're learning more about how to get the job done under the current circumstances. And despite the fact that we can't gather together, I'm confident that this will be the most widely attended Leliefontein ever, by being able to post it out for the entire regimental family to see online. Once this is all over, I look forward to having all of you back in Petawawa for a proper parade. Not only on our new parade square, which is newly paved and getting its lines painted, but in our new Dragoon headquarters building. I think we're all looking forward to those days and a way to pay proper respects to our retiring Dragoons by driving them off of our new parade square. But if there's one aspect that we can take out as a positive from these current times, it's that we've shown that we can record and display these ceremonies for all to see. So even if you're not able to make it to Petawawa for Leliefontein, change of appointments or changes of command, we've found a way to keep Dragoons connected everywhere. So what I'd ask of all Dragoons over the next year is that you maintain that connection. There will be a number of us deployed, but many more remaining in Petawawa and in Gagetown who continue to train and instruct the next generation of Dragoons and Canadian Forces soldiers. Stay connected with one another using all the tools that we have at our disposal, and look to remain socially engaged while physically distanced. Thank you for all of your support, and congratulations to the award winners that we're going to recognize here today. You are all fine examples in the long tradition of our regiment. Bold and swift.
We will now begin the presentation of the Leliefontein Awards. The CO, Lieutenant Colonel Kirchhoff, and the Regimental Sergeant Major, Chief Warrant Officer LaRouche, will now recognize the top signals operator from across the Royal Canadian Corps of Signals with the presentation of a commanding officer's coin. The commanding officer's coin is presented to Corporal Nicholas Campbell from D Squadron. Yeah. Brigadier General Atkinson and Chief Warrant Officer LaRouche will now present the Royal Canadian Dragoons Association Award. The Royal Canadian Dragoons Association Award is awarded annually to the best all-around trooper in the regiment and is awarded this year to Trooper Timothy York from B Squadron.
congratulations. Dennis Levack, the Career Association President from the Very Army. He presented on behalf of the association all those recruits that have gotten employed. Boston set a high standard, recognized by all. Congratulations, well done. We're going to take a trip back.
You can take your seats. We will now announce the Leliefontein Award, which is awarded annually to the top crewman corporal in the regiment. This year's recipient is Corporal Robert Sanderson from D Squadron. Corporal Sanderson was unable to be here for the ceremony today. We will now announce the Leliefontein Award. This award is given to the top non-crewman corporal on strength within the regiment. This year's recipient is Corporal Tu An Do from C Squadron. Corporal Tu An Do is currently in Gagetown and will be awarded this award at a later date. Presenting the Eckhart Memorial Plaque is Lieutenant Colonel Kirchhoff and Chief Warrant Officer LaRouche. The Eckhart Memorial Plaque is awarded annually to the most outstanding crewman master corporal in the regiment. This year's recipient is Sergeant Paulo Anthony Tan from D Squadron. Presenting the ETQMS plaque is Brigadier General Atkinson and Lieutenant Colonel Kirchhoff. The ETQMS plaque is awarded annually to the best all-around non-crewman Master Corporal in the regiment. This year's recipient is Master Corporal Dave Alley from Headquarters Squadron.
Written and please below your keep that on whether we're running tennis or training, everything else. You recognize your leadership. Want to pick it up.
Lieutenant Colonel Kirchhoff and Chief Warrant Officer LaRouche will now present the Commanding Officer's Shield. The Commanding Officer's Shield is awarded annually to the most outstanding crewman sergeant in the regiment. This year's recipient is Warrant Officer Jeremy Selway from D Squadron. The Regimental Sergeant Major's pay stick is awarded annually to the most outstanding crewman warrant officer within the regiment. The recipient of this year's Regimental Sergeant Major's pay stick is Warrant Officer Mike Trubella, who is currently posted to the Combat Training Center headquarters in Gagetown, New Brunswick. He was unable to attend today's ceremony. Presenting the Commanding Officer's sword is Lieutenant Colonel Kirchhoff. The Commanding Officer's sword was donated by Brigadier General Grieve, who was the 29th Commanding Officer of the regiment. This award is given annually to the subaltern of the regiment who, through the judgment of the officers of the regiment, has displayed the highest qualities of leadership, integrity, and ability. This year's recipient of the Commanding Officer's sword is Lieutenant Tegan Martin from D Squadron.
Hold on.
Established in perpetuity in 2014 by Lieutenant Colonel retired Dean Tremblay, the Guild of the Royal Canadian Dragoons Award for Volunteer and Community Service recognizes a member of the regimental family who demonstrates outstanding commitment to community service through volunteer work, both in and or out of uniform. This year's award is awarded to Corporal Roland Lehman from the regimental headquarters. Corporal Lehman was unavailable for the ceremony today. The Leliefontein Guild Bursary is a bursary awarded annually by the Guild of the Royal Canadian Dragoons to dragoons who are posted in the regiment, extra-regimentally employed, or retired, and their dependents. This year's top recipient for the Leliefontein Bursary is Miss Chelsea Greeno, spouse of Warrant Officer Whitehead. The other successful applicants of the Guild Bursary will be contacted at a later date. The Guild Distinguished Service Award is awarded for outstanding voluntary dedication to furthering the objectives of the Guild of the Royal Canadian Dragoons. Mr. Lys Bersauskis was presented the Guild Distinguished Service Award by the Colonel of the Regiment, Brigadier General Atkinson, on 4 November 2020 for his tireless efforts over the past 10 years in support of the Guild Donor Recognition Program. This concludes the Leliefontein Awards. The action at Leliefontein. In the early morning on the 6th of November, a strong British column left the eastern Transvaal town of Belfast and rode south to disperse a large Boer commando reported to be camped about 30 kilometers to the south near the Comitai River. The force included the Canadian Mounted Rifles, the Royal Canadian Dragoons, and one section of D Battery, the Royal Canadian Field Artillery, with two 12-pounder guns. After forcing the commando back across the river, the column camped for the night near a farm named Leliefontein. Boer resistance had been stronger than expected, however, and the British commander expected them to be reinforced during the night. He therefore issued orders for a return to Belfast in the morning. The Boer commander, who had brought up reinforcements, believed that the British would continue their advance and prepared to meet them on the road heading south in the morning. In one day, the flying column had advanced southward from Belfast and uprooted a Boer stronghold alongside of the Comitai. There, the column retired for the night, only to be counterattacked the next morning, November 7th, by the enemy. Covering the vulnerable rear of the withdrawal were the Dragoons under their commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel Lessard, as well as D Battery, Royal Canadian Field Artillery, under Lieutenant Morrison. The Dragoons at that time, barely 100 strong, were holding a plateau 2 miles long when they suddenly became aware that the enemy had almost encircled them, cropping up into a semicircle on their left and front. When a courier arrived to say that Lieutenant Cockburn's two understrength troops on the extreme left were under heavy attack, Colonel Lessard ordered Lieutenant Morrison to retire one gun and take the other to help Lieutenant Cockburn. Galloping over a mile, Morrison got his gun into action, but the Boers were swarming up their fronts, and he asked Cockburn to extend his men forward to cover the gun. Hardly a dozen shells had been fired when the gunners saw a large party of Boers coming in on the left rear. Cockburn saw them too, and as the half section limbered up and galloped back, the young officer thrust his men between the gun and the oncoming enemy. Only 30 in all, they stood firm against the onslaught of 200 Boers. It was a sacrifice as the small party was wiped out. 6 escaped, the rest were killed, wounded, or taken prisoner, and among the latter was Lieutenant Cockburn. The gun got away, but it was not yet safe. The horses, spent from the second straight day of strenuous action, slowed from a gallop to a trot and then to a walk. Morrison unlimbered and again went into action. A running fight followed, the cavalry resisting every inch of the way, the gunners, with ammunition running dangerously low, deliberately picking the best targets. With the Boers barely 300 yards away, the gun was again in jeopardy. Limbering up, Morrison once again attempted to gain the ridge. The brief respite had helped the exhausted horses, and the gun crew ran beside the carriage to lighten the load. But only one trooper remained in escort, and Morrison sent him off to ask for aid from Colonel Lassard. The Dragoons were involved in a furious battle all across the plain, and the trooper gave his message to the first officer he found, Lieutenant R.E.W. Turner. Lieutenant Turner, already wounded in the neck and arm, promptly led his troop to the rescue. Only a dozen strong, they galloped over, threw themselves from their horses, and poured volley after volley into the advancing Boers. But then, not 50 yards away, the gun got away, reaching the ridge, and once more went into action. Miraculously, Turner and his men escaped both death and capture. As every rifle was vital to the Dragoons, Sergeant Holland, alone and under heavy enemy attack, continued to operate the Colt machine gun, its deadly burst of fire taking a terrible toll, but not stopping the Boer advance. Leaving withdrawal to the last possible moment, Sergeant Holland invited capture and barely escaped, saving the gun by lifting it from its mounting and galloping off with the weapon under his arm. Having failed to capture any guns, the Boer pursuit tapered off, and by late afternoon, the column and rear guard were all back in camp. In view of the fierce and prolonged action, the Canadian casualties were light, but higher than any one previous engagement. Lieutenant Cockburn, released by the Boers later that same day, along with Lieutenant Turner and Sergeant Holland, were all awarded the Victoria Cross for outstanding courage, valor, and devotion in the face of the enemy. Private Kinsley was awarded the Distinguished Conduct Medal, and Lieutenant Morrison of the Royal Canadian Horse Artillery was awarded the Distinguished Service Order for his part in the day's work. The Colonel of the Regiment, Brigadier General Atkinson, will now address the ceremony.
Well, good morning, Dragoons, and welcome. And for those of you joining us on Facebook or on YouTube, I'm just glad that we can all be here together. The reality of the pandemic this year is that we are not together, but we can still share. About a third of the regiment's getting ready to deploy to Latvia, and the rest of the regiment is conducting fall training. In fact, they just got out of the field last night. Now, we are together today on this special day. It's actually warm outside. The forecast is that we're going to hit 18 degrees. There's no snow. And we're indoors. Kind of ironic. I think back of all those past Leliefontein parades where we sat out under a piece of canvas on the edge of the Worthington Parade Square. We were shivering. Soldiers had snow piling up on their shoulders. Sometimes we had freezing rain. But here we are today, indoors, and it's actually sunny outside. But I'll tell you, as you watch this ceremony from the comfort of your couch at home, know that this is a key date and a time in our regimental history. And the reading of that action at Leliefontein just underscores the dedication, the professionalism, and the courage of our soldiers on that date and all those awards, those 3 Victoria Crosses, a feat that has not been repeated. Now, as I stand here at the dais looking out, I'm seeing these 2 great parade markers that were just donated by the RCD Association and Dennis Leck. And I want to say thank you to them. I'd seen pictures before today, but it didn't do them justice. A great addition to our parades. So as I said, today is a date that we remember and we reflect on that bravery and dedication of our soldiers. Over the years, Leliefontein has been a homecoming for members of the regimental family as we gathered for sports days, mess dinners, parades, receptions, and just to spend time and see each other and reconnect. Today, because of COVID, we do not have a large parade. In fact, it is just this small ceremony. We did not have a regimental dinner, and we did not have that normal gathering of the family. But we're here on the other end of a camera. We've got the gun on parade. We've got the guidon. We have the Victoria Crosses that were presented back in 1900. We got that small guard of soldiers who were the recipients of the Leliefontein Awards. And I want to congratulate each of them again for their performance and for being recognized. And I want to thank the regiment for making the effort to help us to properly commemorate this key date in our history, because it's one that's important. And I congratulate you, CO and RSM, for having taken the effort to make sure that we did it right in the circumstances that we're in. Now I want to take just a moment and talk about your guild of the Royal Canadian Dragoons and what they have been doing for the regimental family. The objectives of the guild haven't changed. They are simply to promote, protect, preserve, and further the traditions and the heritage of the Royal Canadian Dragoons as a part of the Canadian Armed Forces, and to promote the well-being, the morale, and the quality of life of the regimental family by funding, supporting, and undertaking projects that assist cadets and current and former soldiers and their families, and to promote public awareness of our fine regiment. But what does the Guild do? They fund the annual production of the Springbuck Dragoon. They funded the creation and maintenance of Dragoon Park. They maintain the RCD Museum collection and our archives. They provide the education bursaries, as we announced earlier today, every fall at this parade. They help families and ill and injured soldiers when needed. They provide support to our fallen. Charlie Butler Chevrolet provided a vehicle to help the Guild deliver on the program, and it's used by the Guild on a regular basis to help us out in the delivery of our program. But our largest project came to fruition this year, and that was the production of the next volume of our regimental history into their second century. Now, we planned to have a great book launch last June in conjunction with the change of the guidon, with the change of command, and with the association reunion. We were going to have the authors present. We were going to have book signings. But all of that was postponed because of the pandemic. But the book is out. It arrived in Petawawa at the end of April, and it is available in the RCD kit shop. It's the result of 8 years of work. And I want to publicly thank the authors, Mike McNorgan and Alan Halper. They volunteered their time, and a lot of it, to produce this great book. But books are no good when they're just sitting on the shelf in the kit shop. Make sure you get yours so you can read about your regiment, you can reflect on the stories, look at the great photos, and then share your memories with fellow Dragoons. The Guild is entirely funded by donations from our serving, retired members, and friends of the regiment. So if you're not already doing so, I just ask you to consider supporting your Guild. It's a charity. We're a not-for-profit corporation. Tax receipts are issued for all donations. I thank you for your continued support of your Guild. But my most important message today is about the importance of the Dragoon family. We need to look after each other. We need to look out for each other. We need to call, text, email, do FaceTime, do Zoom, drop by and visit whenever you can to each other. The important thing is to check up and to check in on all of your Dragoon family and all your friends and make sure that they are okay and that they're doing fine. That is the strength of the regimental family. It is the family and the families that look at each other, after each other in these difficult times. I'll tell you what, it's another fine day to be a Dragoon. I am honored to be present with you here today as we commemorate our Leliefontein ceremony in the fashion that we are doing here today. Colonel of the Regiment out. Thank you, Dragoons.
Ladies and gentlemen, please rise for the departure of the regimental guidon.
Guidon party! March off the guidon! Dragoons, attention! To your guidon, salute! Dragoons, attention!
This concludes the 2020 Leliefontein Ceremony. On behalf of Lieutenant Colonel Kirchhoff, Chief Warrant Officer LaRoche, and all ranks of the Royal Canadian Dragoons, thank you for tuning in to today's commemoration.